All right. Hello. Let's see if everything's working. I think so. Good morning. So it's been a while since I streamed. I've been working on this Divergent to Do's project. Uh, and I think I'm actually quite ready to release it. Do I have? Yeah, so I have like a. Oh, yeah, that's. Let's see. Just gonna. So I have like a landing page now, and I made this like pep talk introduction thing. I have an article that I just published. I'm just waiting for some more feedback, and then I'm gonna try to like push it. Not push it, but like advertise that it exists. Anyways, but what we're gonna do is we're gonna talk about state management in Solid.js, because I watched this talk by Ryan about I think it's 2.0 of Solid, which is gonna have some async primitives. And we like on this stream, we've been exploring Impact React async primitives for a long time. So like with this impact thing, we were looking at query and mutation, even the signal itself here actually has first class support for promises. And then we also looked at, let's see, React X. So, and then we had this React X thing. Oh my God, we've been exploring so much stuff. That also has like query and mutation. Yeah, so I have some thoughts on how to like build these async APIs in the context of a component. But first of all, I wanted to just state that the reason, and it also made me reflect, like React is just moving further and further away from what I need from a tool, while Solid seems to like go closer and closer to what I need from like a UI tool. And it made me reflect on like why I'm so stubborn with React. And the reason is that I think React still has a better UI model, like keeping the UI up to date from a developer experience perspective. So what I mean is like if I have like count, set count, use state, this is just pseudocode. So I have like h1 count is count and then button. So the set count here isn't that important. It's more like how it keeps that UI up to date. So I'll get back to that. Increase and then set count, count +1, for example. So the reason why I think React is a much better mental model for the UI is because that mental model is you have this function app. It's called, you know what? We're not even gonna have the state here because that's when it starts breaking. So we're gonna have count and set count. So here you can see that you have this function called app. And when that's called, you're returning some UI. And statically, like we're just consuming the count directly, right? So in your mind as a developer, you can kind of translate this into that this return is actually a description of the UI. And the JSX here is, there's no magic happening. It's just a different way of writing like hdiv, for example, right? But in terms of like the runtime, consuming variables, everything is just JavaScript. Yeah. And even if we do, but then the tricky thing happens with React is when you actually do state management. So count, set count equals use state. So here, the idea of the component, like every time the count changes, it's just going to run the whole function again. It just returns a new value, and then React compares those two return values and makes the DOM updates. That's such a simple model. But when we start introducing state, that's when React starts breaking, because now it's like every time this app runs, we're setting the state to 0, right? It's called use state, but when you read this, you have to really understand, like, it's very complex what's happening under the hood. So the simplicity of just keeping UIs up to date is just completely broken with hooks. Well, not broken, but it just gets so much more complex, because now you have to understand how this state is being managed across these like reconciliation calls to the component. But at the same time, we still have this very simple, okay, whatever I return is going to be compared to the previous thing I returned, and that's what's keeping the UI up to date. Very, very simple stuff. Okay, that's why I like React and why I don't like React. So with Solid, it kind of flips around, right? So you have create signal instead. We can even run this. So you have create signal, and now the good thing for the mental model is that this function only runs once, right? That's a really good thing for state management. So create signal is only called once. You create that signal when the component is mounted, right? That's a good mental model. But then if you just return one thing from the function, how is then the UI kept up to date? Well, it needs to create these observing scopes, right? So the function itself isn't observing anything, right? It needs to have these observing scopes created. And this is the complexity, right? It's not just returning a new value, it diffs with the previous value. That's a simple mental model. But here you have to think about the state you're consuming or the values you're consuming and what scope they are being used in. So for example, here, when we create a signal, this count is actually a function, right? It's a function. So if I were to call the count here, that's when I extract the value, right? But we already have a problem because I just said that we only return once. And I've been working with JavaScript for a long time. I understand its runtime quite deeply. So when I see this code, I see that we are extracting 0 and we are returning 0, right? I know that we only return once, and that returned actual object will be the value 0. There's no observing scope here at all. And this is the problem with Solid. It just, the way you use it or express your code doesn't fit with the runtime, like how you understand the runtime of JavaScript. And that bugs the hell out of me. So I'm gonna show you like what actually happens under the hood here. So again, we have to call count. So here it makes sense, right? So, and this is also the thing. Here it makes no sense. As I said, it doesn't make sense that this count is extracted once with the return value. But here on the onClick, we just want to extract the recent value, right? So it just gets the recent count. So that makes a lot of sense. But anyways, let's actually look at this. So localhost, I think it's 3000. Yeah, the count. Let's bump up the DevTools here. And let's see. So, and I'm not here to say that Solid is bad. Like, I'm actually here to kind of more express that I feel like choosing React and Solid is a choice between like having a good DX on state management or having a good DX. Well, not even good DX, because you have to accept certain things. I guess that's the thing. Like, what do you want to accept? Anyways, So what's interesting here is that when we actually look at the generated code, is that I'm just thinking if we should try to run this without the compiler. So the thing is that Solid.js has a compiler, because the way you need to manually manage these observation scopes, I don't know the history here, but I think the compiler is there to kind of simplify things, or kind of clean up the code. And this is why I have problems with API designs. It's when the API design there is there to make things easy, but it's not there to lean on the expected behavior. Like, it changes the behavior of the code you're reading, right? And that's exactly what's happening here. Because even though I am calling this count here, it's not being called in the compiled code. So what's actually running there, let's just see that it works first. Yeah, so it works. What's actually being run there is this. So the compiler kind of sees the count, it understands it's a signal or whatever. It sees that it's being called, and then it just doesn't call it. Which means that if I do this, it should still work. And it does, because that's the actual code that's being run. And that's because Solid.js is able to basically provide functions. So the thing that kind of really happens there is it's kind of like this, if we kind of unwrap it. So this is an observation scope, which makes a lot of sense to me, right? It's kind of like, okay, this is an observation scope. So if I consume any signals here, it's gonna track those signals. And the same happens here. I use a function here to create an observation scope, and then it's going to track whatever I access inside it. But doing this makes absolutely no sense to me. Like, this isn't the code that's actually running. And then you can argue, yeah, whatever. And that's okay. And that's what I mean. If you accept that, then of course this like looks great. It looks nice, it's easy, but it doesn't reflect the actual behavior of the code. Okay, so because I did this like full like reflection journey yesterday, so let me track back. So this is kind of sets the stage for things, and then I was like, why was this chosen? Like, why was this choice even needed, to put it that way? Because what you could do, there's two things. It's that we don't actually use these explicit observation scopes. And the second thing is that we allow you to consume values directly, right? You have to call the count to extract the value. Because what you can do is you can do this store, create store. You can do this instead, and then what's this, like store, set store, something like that. So, and this is where it gets weird, because also here current value would be count, right? You have to call it because it's a single value that you have to unwrap to be able to observe it in an observation scope. But then you have store, and store doesn't actually need to do this. You can do store.count like this, but this is a different kind of unwrapping. This unwrapping isn't based on calling a function and extracting a single value. This is implicit unwrapping by accessing the count on the store, right? It looks much better though. So if we were to change this, so we have like store.count, and then I guess it will be set store. How would this look like? Prev count, prev.count plus 1, something like that. And this should still work, right? Yeah. So now you have like this mix of a very like functional kind of thing where you're forced to call the function to wrap the value. It's like, it's different. That's my point. It's different than this. And you still have this, okay, reading this code, this store.count is the current value of store.count. That's what's being returned from this function. And if the function is being called only once, then it's the 0 that's being returned. There's nothing there to really like indicate that it's going to keep that thing up to date. But if you did this, then it would at least indicate in the code that we have an observation scope, and this is a dynamic part of the UI, right? And this should also still work. And I find it's weird, like why didn't Solid or the well, I don't mean to come off as like, why did they make these decisions? Like, it's a lot of history. I would know, like building, for example, like Overmind, like you build certain things, you change your mind later, you discover things, you learn things, and all of this stuff. But what I don't quite understand is why, since it supports a function here, why isn't this typed? So if I go into this H1 HTML attributes, and let's see, it's called children. You have element. So an element can be, and maybe there's something I haven't understood here, but an element can also be, let's see, number, sorry, string, boolean, null, or undefined. So this is valid Solid.js code. So I wish, at least for the typing sake, that you could like choose to be very explicit about these observation scopes. And it would also allow you to not use the compiler to kind of create the magic, but you would still have valid code. So I can also do this because, again, it's like it's unwrapping the count from the store by its sheer access of the value. So this still works. And but then I was like, okay, in this isolated example, I would like to be explicit. Like, I like to express the dynamic nature of this count in the UI definition. I really like that. But then this is a very simple UI definition. So you could argue that when you get a lot of this stuff, it starts getting tricky. And that's probably true. So for example, yeah, so that's a conclusion of that part. And then it's another thing that also kind of gets hidden. So to show you that, let's see, what if we create like a counter function? Oh, I have so much to show you. So many thoughts. Let's see. So let's create a counter component. I'm gonna create, okay, can I use this in Solid? I guess so. So we're gonna do count and set count or increase. And then we're gonna do, oh, excuse me, increase, and then increase, let's see, something like that. And then count equals count, sorry, store.count. Yeah, let's just type it, number increase, increase, oh, that's just void. And then we could do like, okay, let's just do it from scratch here. So if I do this, we have a count, but nothing is happening, right? And then we can take a look why doesn't, and this breaks the mental model, right? Because I was able to use store.count directly in an element, but when I pass it as a prop, suddenly it seems like I can't do it. But I think if I do props, then I can do it. And the reason is the implicit unwrapping of the value. Well, that's not completely true. Well, it's kind of true, but it's in combination with the compiler. So like, why does it work like this? Sorry, I didn't like prep this. So if we look here, yes, so here you have it. So the compiler sees the props I'm passing, and it knows, I don't know how it identifies signals, but it does. And it changes it into a getter. You see this? This is how the props are actually passed, and it's passed as a getter. So if I destructure it, I'm just getting the initial value when this function runs, right? But if I use props.count, then I dynamically access it, right? But only because the compiler actually does this as well, right? So now it makes sense that if this is a getter, this is how I will kind of create the dynamic nature of it. But what I could do is I could just state that, let's see, sorry, increase. What I could rather do is I could just say that this needs to be dynamic, for example. And then I would do this, and then it should work, right? But now I don't need a compiler here. I've like explicitly stated that, okay, I'm gonna pass this getter for the count. And then I guess, yeah, and then the count is a function, and I can pass a function in here. But then this gets a little bit confusing as well, right? Because I read the count here in the variable right here, but I don't really see that it's a function. But it's more correct still, like, because it is a function. But again, I'm not saying that this is like better or anything. It's like just dissecting and reflecting on what's going on. So this is also like, it's just bad that it just stops working because you're destructuring, because of the magic of the compiler. And then you can accept that, right? Just accept the fact that you shouldn't destructure props and you'll be fine, right? And that's okay. I'm not sure if I'm okay with that. That's the thing. So what I was playing around with is like, we kind of have this very functional, immutable thing going on here or there. And then we're kind of leaning towards something more like immutable. And it is mutable, but not quite. It still has a functional API, which is weird to me. Because the set store is functional, right? But you just consume the values. Well, maybe that's the wrong way to put it. So what I mean is that it's mutable in the sense that you have an object that you're consuming and you access nested things, and you're able to use set store to change parts of this object. And as I understand it, it mutates it. It treats every value in the nested object as a signal, which is like the power of this. Like you can change like the completed state of 1 of 100 to-dos, and it's only that single text node that's actually going, sorry, not text node, but that input checkbox that's actually going to update. Nothing else is going to update when you make that change. But the API doesn't quite reflect that. So, and I think Solid, when it was in its inception, it was about like giving React developers an alternative. So it wanted to stay true to React API signatures. But I think this is the fundamental problem of having an observation approach. as opposed to a reconciliation approach of React, because I've never seen observation work for single values, like giving a nice experience. The only way it's nice is when you do kind of like what you're kind of used to in MobX. And the reason it works very well in MobX is because you combine it with classes, and classes are objects, right? So you never write, at least it's not common to use MobX to create single values, like observable values. What you do is that you define a class, you tag what is going to be observable properties, but you're still consuming an object, right? And this, I think, is the problem with observation, the observation strategy, is that you're trying to mix both. You're trying to, as we could see here, you want a nice way to you want a nicer way to consume values from an object because you can, because you're implicitly like unwrapping the signal by accessing the properties. But you can't do that with a single value. So you need a different API for that. So I was kind of backtracking and thinking, okay, how could you actually avoid this? So what if Solid just had like state, and you have to use an object? And the reason you use an object is because of this. It's just because you don't want this like exotic call a value as a function type of thing. You should be able to just access it as normal. But that means you need proxies and stuff, which is, again, something you would have to accept. But anyways, so the way this will work is, now we can move back to the previous example. Count, state.count. And now the interesting thing is that this create state doesn't take any inspiration from React at all. Because the way you would change this is you would just say state count ++. So you just mutate the thing. And that is what the create store is also doing under the hood, but it has like this abstraction over it, which I don't. Yeah, it's an open question for me. Like, why have that set store thing? Why not just go the distance and just do this? Anyways, so the point is, like, what if Solid didn't have create signal or create store? It just had create state, and you always have to define it as an object, even though there's a single value. It's just the way it works, and it's just because you have to unwrap the signal to know what you're accessing. And this is a much nicer way to do that, as opposed to calling it as a function. But then you still have this, like, okay, you should really do it like this to not have the compiler change your code and kind of breaking your brain on the whole thing I was talking about of a single return value. It doesn't reflect its dynamic nature. But this is pretty nice, I think. And it works like with arrays, like you push, and it's kind of like a MobX meeting Solid kind of thing, which is super nice. And then you have all the freedom of what you're used to in state management that's not part of a reconciler. Like, this whole function scope runs once, right? So you can do absolutely whatever you want here. But you're gonna have this like state thing that is observable state. So you have the composability of like using multiple functions and all of this stuff. Anyways, so that's kind of what I was thinking. At least it would make Solid more appealing for me, having one way to define, consume, and set state, instead of having these two different ways of doing it, especially with a compiler on top. Like, I'm more... it's more likely that I'm gonna accept this as like a compiler magic thing, than having like create signal and create store and kind of juggling those. And sometimes I have to call it. I don't really have to call it because under the hood it's going to work. But if I use it in a create effect, I have to call the value, but not if it's a store, then I can just access it. Like, yeah. And this could be, of course, maybe this is how teams using Solid does it. They kind of just say, no, we're going to use stores because of consistency and not get into like any confusion or whatever the case might be. Anyways, yes, but there's still a problem. And this was kind of the deep reflection is, as I stated, observability doesn't really work with single values. So what's interesting about this is like if you have a list of items here, for example, and then we have a list here, and I would even accept these things like the four, like the explicit components for, what's it called? Flow. What the hell do you call it? Oh, I can't remember the term. Like ifs and elses and control flow. That's what it's called. Anyways, so you have this for thing, and let's see, li. But now we have a problem again. And the reason is, well, first of all, to me, it's super weird that like you can't actually do this. This is not valid code. But the reason this actually works is because, so how should I put this? Like what actually makes the for component observe these items? And what actually happens under the hood, at least to my understanding, is that the for component is going to iterate on the items, right? Of course it has to. It has to map over them or do a for loop or whatever. What's going to happen under the hood is it's going to implicitly access the length property. And whenever the array changes, it's going to update the length, right? And that's going to trigger the for loop again, and then that's how it observes. But here it kind of looks like it's not dynamic. You're just saying these are the items. It's not like this one, where you're kind of giving it an observation scope and stating this is dynamic. Here it doesn't look dynamic. It's just implicitly dynamic because implicitly the for component is accessing the length property of the items, which makes it observe it. I would like, this would make more sense to me because you're again stating that, okay, it's dynamically accessing the items, but it, yeah, anyways, just a tiny reflection. But again, I would definitely accept this, like personally. But then the problem becomes that it's not only state definitions that are single values, you also have arguments. So for example, here, yeah, I'm actually not sure what, okay. Yeah, so this is the confusing thing for me. So the item here becomes the actual unwrapped value. So we can put item here, but the index becomes an accessor. I'm not sure why. Probably a very, very good reason. Like maybe it's like, well, there's no key here. So maybe it's like how it needs to, if you're using the index for something, it needs to like observe that index. Like this, the index isn't the actual index. It's the signal for that node in the list, kind of. And that index might change depending on how it moves these things around. So it needs to be like an observed value. But my point is that this was now unwrapped, but this isn't. So if you were to, hi Adam, happy Sunday. So the point is that what I'm trying to like say here, maybe it would be simpler if you only consume state as objects, but then you wouldn't get away from things like this. So the index would still have to be consumed like it could do this though, given the typing was correct. But what you normally would do is this. So this is the thing I just don't like this for two reasons. I don't like calling, like forcing unwrapping of a value, especially when you have such a nice way to implicitly do it through object access. And then it's the fact that it works without it. That also bothers me. But I think I would prefer that. Like I would prefer that if there are like components or whatever that's providing me these single values through arguments, I would rather want the typing to allow me to just use them. But then again, maybe I would have like a create effect inside here. And then this index wouldn't work. So then you could argue like, okay, what if Solid.js just kind of had a core value of not exposing values as single values? Like everything is objects, because then you have this really nice implicit observation through property access. Then you will kind of have to do, yeah, what would you have to do? Like, would it need to be an object? Well, that wouldn't quite work, would it? Because then you're consuming it up here. Yeah, it's interesting. Like you could do params, and then you could have params.index, params.item. Yeah, I don't know. It's a tricky thing. I wish there was a way for, like there was a way for JavaScript natively to define what's it called? A literal as an observer. Like I don't know even how that will work. Or an observable, sorry. That when you're like consuming that number or that string in a certain context, it would somehow inform. So you wouldn't have to have these like weird abstractions of calling it as a function or making it an object and you dot value into it, or you're kind of forced to use these objects. Anyways, so my point is that what I would love to see for Solid is to have like one way to deal with state, which is object based, and you just mutate. I don't see any reason to have that like functional API of like making a change, and you have the produce and all of that. Like, why not just allow you to mutate? It's so much smoother. And then, yeah, and then the second thing is like, why not allow you to actually pass functions? Because you can. That would be really nice. So I didn't have to call index. I could just pass index. That's fine. Yeah, I feel like this reads a lot better. But anyways, this is more like nitty-gritty details and reflections. And now we're getting to the other reflections, which is around async. And from what Ryan presented, it was like a low-level primitive called create async. And what's interesting about create async is that I think it really works. Like it's very similar to this concept of a resource. So you have resource, set resource, or no, you have like mutate and refresh or something. Create resource. Promise.resolve. Foo. Is it? Oh, not refetch. So currently in Solid, you have this thing called a resource, and the resource has like these observable, like loading. You can point to loading, you can point to state, you can point to latest to get the latest value, and you have error and stuff like that. But you can use the resource itself as a value, which is basically the use hook of React. So it consumes the resource as is and then throws to the suspense boundary of Solid, which is really nice. But then the low level create async didn't have mutate. I'm trying to, I think it was more like async. So it was like create, do we have create async here? Yeah, so it was async dot, was it refresh? By the way, that presentation didn't say that these APIs were final, but I think it had like a refresh or something. And the point was you will be able to refresh the value, but you would also be able to, what was this? Ah, shit, I can't quite remember this. Because you could also mix it with a different signal, I think. So the point is like, how do you do optimistic? Yeah, that might be. But the point is, like, it's a low-level primitive. And in my experience, I don't think async makes sense as a low-level primitive, because there's two different async operations you want to do. It's to pull down data, and it is to push data, right? You want to grab something from the server, you want to send something to the server. And we call that query and mutation. That's like a popular two labels for async operations and like the nature of them. And when you have like a low-level primitive like create async, it just has this, it's harder to reason about how you would achieve these things. How would you, does it even make sense to use create async for mutations? Like there is a promise in there and it is async, but how does it fit into mutations? And then how does it fit into queries? So like we did a few iterations on this. Like we had yeah, we had the ReactX thing or MobX Lite, which I think is kind of the final. Yeah. I don't think, and that's the thing. It's like I don't think you would do mutations with create async. But why call it create async? Because mutations are also async. So it's like, I think I'm hung up on the low-level terminology of it. Like there's different kinds of async, which can't be encapsulated by a simple async primitive. You need something more than that to actually be able to do something. So let's see. Oh. Ikke helt, jeg er snart ferdig, Oskar. Nei, det må du ikke ta bort. Fordi da, det er noen som er med og spør, og jeg snakker med. Men kan du heller gå ut til mamma? Vær så snill, Oskar. Okay, let's try this. Yeah, exactly. It's a primitive name. And then it's like it only has a refresh. So what about optimistic updates, for example? And this is what I think our conclusion. Du må gå opp til mamma, vær så snill. Du, hvis vi skal spille etterpå, så må du la pappa gjøre seg ferdig. Ok? Jeg er snart ferdig. Sorry. Yeah, so what I feel that we kind of found, and I think optimistic updates is the thing that kind of becomes the issue, because optimistic updates is a mix of both, right? You have query and you have mutation. And then like with create async, it's not like given how you do optimistic updates. Yeah. Yeah, because that's what I can't remember the syntax, because it created a signal that represents the data, but then it would put that signal into create async. Or would it put the create async and then put the signal? Could you try to find it, Adam? the example? I can't remember exactly how he did it. But anyways, that's the tricky thing, right? Is how you manage optimistic things with queries and mutations. So I had to play around with this as well. Yeah, but he changed the signal directly. But how did he map the thing he mutated with the async and the refresh? That's the thing that's not clear to me. Because I think he had a signal that he would just change. But then how was that signal updated using async? Or was it? No, he was just calling the server, and then he called refresh on the async thing. But how did he get the optimistic thing in there? Yeah, we need a code example for that. But that's the thing. It's not obvious to me with create async. How would you do optimistic updates? And you can have a pattern for that, and that's perfectly fine. But the thing that we concluded with in like React X is like optimistic updates. You can try, because I did this for many years. Like I would have the actual thanks a bunch. So I would actually have local state, right? And then I would, whenever I push to the server, I would just mutate the actual state. And if I really needed to know that it was in flight, I would add properties to the state to kind of give each item in a to-do list like a pending state, for example, if it was mutating, and it would have an error. But I have found that it's better to treat optimistic updates Oskar, du må være så snill, la pappa gjøre seg ferdig. Så skal vi spille sammen etterpå, ok? Ja, men pappa sitter og snakker med noen andre. Nei. Jo. Nei. Og så må du være så snill gå ut så pappa kan gjøre seg ferdig. Fordi hvis ikke du lar meg gjøre meg ferdig, så har ikke jeg noe lyst til å spille med deg heller. Nå spurte jeg deg om jeg kunne få lov til å gjøre det her først. Da har jeg veldig lyst til å spille med deg etterpå. Så du må la pappa gjøre det her ferdig. Ja. Nå faktisk lyg du. Nei, jeg gjør ikke det. Jeg spurte deg om jeg kunne få lov til at jeg hadde lyst til å gjøre det her. Og så hadde vi en avtale om det. Og nå føler jeg du bryter avtalen. Nei. For nå klarer ikke pappa å gjøre seg ferdig. Jeg må få lov til å ta. Du kan være her, men da må du ikke tulle sånn da. Ok? Jeg må få lov til å tulle. Nei, for da ødelegger du for pappa. Men det gjør ikke det her. Men du må gjerne være her også. Det er bare koselig det. Du sa ikke det. Nei. Men skal vi prøve det da? Du er her til pappa gjør seg ferdig? Ok. Da bruker lang tid. Nei, jeg lover. Sorry, it's the 4-year-old. Yes, so it would have... Oh yeah, create... Oh, so there's a different create optimistic. Oh, I forgot about that. And then you have this transition. Yeah, so to me, this felt like unnecessarily... Like it wasn't intuitive to me, but maybe that was because of the the reflection or the result of like exploring what TanStack did, which made a lot more sense to me. So maybe we can actually use this example. That's great. So I played around with the primitives we created for ReactX, but put it into Solid instead. So the way you would do that here is like you would have to-dos query, create query, and then db get to-dos. And I guess what we can do here is like const to-dos as to-do. Let me just type this out. Completed boolean description string, like so. And then what we're going to do here is that we're going to just set a timeout. Oh, sorry, new promise. There's a bit of duplicate typing here, but it just needs to be like this. Resolve. And then we're going to do a set timeout, and we're going to resolve the to-dos, but we need to slice them, or Solid is going to see them as the same result. And then we're going to resolve them after like 2 seconds or something. Okay, so let's call this fetch to-dos, so it kind of looks the same. Oh, sorry. Fetch to-dos, something like that. And I guess we don't even need this now. Okay, cool. So you have this query for fetching the to-dos, and what you have is the data. You have arr, you have fetch, you have, you could call it refetch. It's probably a better term for Solid. But it has is fetching, is revalidating, and it also has the resource. So you can choose, because that's also a thing. It's like this create async thing was intended, as I understood it, is going to be used as a resource. So you actually shove the async value in your element or wherever you're going to consume it. While if you're interested in like dealing with its state, like does it have an error, you have to use a boundary for that, I believe. And if you want to see if you're revalidating it, you have to do some trickery for that, I think. I'm not sure, but it wasn't obvious to me how you would actually do that here, because you have data dot, yeah, so you have dot refresh. Yeah, maybe data also has like a pending state, like is refreshing or something. Yeah, but maybe it's as simple as, so if you use the data, because I think that's what the example was, you have like div. So let's imagine the data is an async string. You could just do this and it would use suspense. But maybe if you did something like this, like latest or something, it wouldn't trigger suspense. You would just read it, which means that you could also look at error. You could look at is pending, is refreshing. Maybe that was the intention. Anyways, so you have this query. Maybe we can actually render these to-dos. And so we have, yeah, we don't have the mutation yet, but we would have yeah, this is also interesting. Like, what if you want a default value? This wasn't a thing with React. I didn't think about that. Yeah, this would actually need a default value. That's interesting. Maybe we can just fix that. Default value is optional, needs to be T. I'm actually not sure. Yeah, so if you have a default value, what should it do then? Should it still do fetching? I don't think that's valid to be fetching and having data. So I guess, okay, let's just make this work. So if default value, it's going to be revalidating instead, default value. And then this is going to be, oh, my goodness. Yeah, and there's another thing here, like this needs to be properly typed, because if you have a default value, the data is never going to be null. You know, let's just ignore that for now. I didn't think about that. So let's ignore it for now. So what we rather do is we're going to do like a show thing. So to when deduce query dot data. So if we have data, we're going to show the thing. Something like that. And I guess we can do this. And this would be to-dos. And then each, isn't this the to-dos? Oh, but now it's a, oh, but that's interesting, because in the for loop, the item is not an accessor, but in the show, it is an accessor. And then that's weird to me. Okay. Anyways, to do, sorry for all the coding here. Oh, sorry, this should be to do. Anyways, do we have anything now? And then if I do, yeah, anyways, we probably have something. Let's add a one to do and see description completed false. Yeah, there we have it. Like it takes a couple of seconds. Anyways, so now we have like a query, and you have all the things for dealing with that query. And if you want to use it as a suspense thing, what you would rather do is to yeah, I wonder how that works. Oh, there are a few things I haven't explored here. You have to excuse me. So I wonder if we use the resource instead on 4, would it then throw to suspense? We could have tried that. Anyways, the point is it wouldn't be like a resource by default. It wouldn't be an accessor like you call it. It would just be this object that has the state of the query, and then you can choose to use it as a resource or like as async or whatever you want to call it. So you explicitly say, I want to use suspense with this, but the query is just a query. And then you have the mutation, add to do mutation. So mutation is its own thing where we pass in like a description. And then what we're going to do inside here is basically do a new promise here as well. No, wait, we don't have to do new promise. We can just make it async. So what we're going to do here is just go to to-dos. We're just going to push it. Completed, false. And the point of this is that instead of you like, let's explore this example again. So here what you're doing is you're creating optimistic and you're pushing the pending to-dos into the same array as into the same array as the non-pending to-dos, right? It's all like one set of state, which is like you can do that, but there is this other approach where you don't do that, which is what I'm showing here. So your query is just a query, your mutation is just a mutation. And then when the mutation is done successfully, you return the refresh of the query. So whenever you do the mutation, go and revalidate this query. And then when you actually perform the mutation, you also have all these things you want to know, right? So when you're doing a mutation, you want to know, is the mutation pending? Does it have an error? And if it's pending, what did I pass to the server so that I can show an optimistic version of this? So blippity boop. So we're going to mutate, and then the thing that's going to happen now is that we're going to I click add, and it's going to take a couple of seconds, and then we get the blippity boop. But if I wanted to show that optimistically, I would have to do something like, okay, so we're going to show it at the end here. Well, you know what? We're just going to do unshift instead. Like you would normally have some kind of sorting, right? For what you're displaying, but we're just going to unshift. And then what we're going to do is show when add to do mutation pending params pending to do and then we're gonna say like pending, sorry, and the point, like, because the tricky thing, if you merge it with your existing state, right, you have all these to-dos that has an ID that came from the server, and then you have this optimistic to-do that doesn't have an ID yet, and then you have to kind of deal with that in your general logic for to-dos, or maybe you're actually filtering them out somewhere. But you can also just treat them as two different types of state. So, oh, this also becomes an accessor. Yeah, it's weird to me. Why is 4 not an accessor? And these are accessors. Anyways, so what we're doing now is that when we're adding a to-do, we're changing the database, but we're also consuming the pending params as like a li element at the top. So when I add something here now, it's there. And then it changes. Right? And if there was an error, if you added something, like if there was an error, you're going to treat that error like in a section for the optimistic to-dos in this case. Another thing is that you might have a filter going for the current list, for example. So if you try to add something and you're optimistically adding it, like how would you do that? Yeah, so you're adding it, but you have a filter on the list, so you won't actually display it as an optimistic update. Like maybe you're filtered on only completed to-dos, and you add a new to-do, and then it doesn't pop up in the list, right? Because you push it in the state of the to-dos, which derives on the filter, which is completed to-dos. It doesn't pop up. But if you have a mutation, you can still list it as a pending to-do, right? And you could even have like an effect when it has been added, or a notification or whatever. If you wanted to do that. The point is that they are different things, and I think they are treated better as different things. And it makes it simpler, doesn't it? Like if we just compare the... Yeah, and why do they have transition? I can't remember why it said transition. I guess it's because it's a set to do's Yeah, I'm not sure. Oh, it's a transition because it shouldn't do anything until... Oh, I think it's... No, I actually don't know. I'm not sure why there's a transition here. Yeah, anyways, it's not to say that you can't do this. Of course you can do this. It was just to show a different way of doing it. So I guess, yeah, my 4-year-old wants to play Lego Undercover with me. Finally, I'm playing like a GTA-ish game with our 4-year-old. So I'm pumped. I'm super pumped. Anyways, so this was just a bunch of rambling reflections, and I think my point is that I struggle so much with state management in React that I think I would favor accepting these yeah. I'm not yeah, I might favor accepting these things. Though the thing I can't get around is that, like, I want to test something. Can I do to-dos like this? Like, does it actually work? No, that actually doesn't work. So the compiler... Yeah, I'm very curious. Why doesn't this work? But I could do... Yeah, I'm very confused by this. So this is the thing, like, this is the thing that melts my brain, is that I can't understand exactly how it's observing these things. So if I do other to-dos, create state, to-dos. Oh, well, let's just use create signal here, so we're not doing anything weird. So other to-dos, other to-do. Yeah, so I think this is what I'm... Let's do description, blip, completed, false. So let's just ignore this stuff. Yeah, no, it doesn't work. Oh, sorry, this was a... No, it doesn't work. You have to call it. But if you call it, it's not this. I don't understand it. If you call it, you're unwrapping the value. But that must be because it's an array, and the array itself is an observable array. It has to be that. Yeah. Which is why you have to unwrap it here. Because this is not... Yeah. I guess... Yeah, and this is the thing. Like, observation for arrays and objects are different than observation... I guess we're getting back to the first point. Observation for objects and arrays is by value, by the actual value. But observation of a literal, like a string and a number and a boolean, that's not by the value, like by the string or by the number. That's by the calling of unwrapping the value. And that makes things like look different and behave differently. And with a compiler on top hiding what's happening, it's a lot to accept for me personally. Which is why I'm kind of... I guess we did this with Vue as well. I was leaning towards Vue. And then there's some insane magic going on in Vue that I just can't accept it. Then I rather struggle with state management in React. Because the UI reconciliation concept is so clean and pure, and Like it's just JavaScript. Anyways, yeah. Do we have a conclusion? Yeah, the thing I'm evaluating is like, would I embrace, like, even if I just built these primitives for myself, would I embrace Solid? And like, I tried overriding the, yeah, but that's fine with the compiler. We don't have to use a function. That's fine. Like, I'm willing to accept this stuff. Like, you're just referencing the thing, and then under the hood, it's actually like, because this would work, right? Oh, wouldn't it? Oh, I broke something else, I guess. What did I do? Other to-dos. For each. Oh. No, to-dos. Oh, sorry. So I can do here, I can do this, but because here it creates a callback, right? Wait, what? Now I'm even more confused. What? Oh, it's because it's a property and it creates a getter out of it. Anyways, okay, so you can see I'm still like struggling with ja, jag ska bara se ha det. Yeah, so I'm kind of still like, my brain isn't like completely attuned to all of this, at least not yet. But I wanted to just share all the reflections and then take it as you wish. And then maybe I'll have like a more solid, no pun intended, conclusion on this at a later point. But yeah, it was nice to get it all out of my head. So I am going to play Lego Undercover. Nei. Nei, vi kan ikke bare skru av. Sorry, I have to go. Bye for now.